Long ago, the story we heard today was called The Parable of the Wise and Foolish Virgins. Nowadays it's called The Parable of the 10 Girls, or maybe the 10 Bridesmaids. And that's because the first translations of the Bible into English were not nearly so accurate as the Bibles we have now. And so, it turns out the word translated as virgin actually just means girl or young woman. So the wise and foolish virgins, that might be a very memorable, intriguing title. It grabs our attention. But whether these girls were technically virgins or not has got nothing to do with the story. However, the title of the story pales into insignificance when you read the actual story. Does this parable win the prize for being the most crazy and complicated of all the stories Jesus told? I think it might. We enter the strange world of first century Middle Eastern wedding customs, which are very different from Scottish 21st century weddings. Weddings took place over a much longer period of time, and rather than the highlight being how late might the bride be to walk down the aisle, the highlight of these weddings were when is the bridegroom going to arrive himself and come to the party. And rather than the bridesmaids spending most of their time hanging out with the bride, one of their jobs was to leave the bride and go out and find the groom and escort him into the event. And if it was dark, then there could be lamps to light the way. So at the very start we have 10 bridesmaids, and they're all waiting, and they've all got lamps and oil. But the groom fails to show up in time. So they all fall asleep. And we're talking all 10 of them. They all fall asleep. And when they're finally jolted awake again, it's after midnight. It's pitch black outside. They're going to need the lamps right enough. But they're starting to run out of oil. 5 of them have got some reserves with them. They're called wise. The other 5 who don't have reserves, they're now called foolish. The 5 bridesmaids then go on to refuse to share what they have with the others. What's so nice about that? We're not sharing with you, they say. So they come over as pretty smug and selfish. Next, the bridegroom turns up, he swans along, and he is unbelievably late. Why should the bridesmaids be blamed for that? His being late is not their fault. The so-called foolish girls are then excluded from the procession by the so-called wise. Why did they have to do that? Why didn't they just use the 5 lights that they had? In fact, it turns out, well, they did use these 5 lights. That's how they get in. But the so-called foolish bridesmaids are left out in the cold and the dark, and they start hunting around at midnight for some all-night supermarket so that they can purchase oil in the middle of the night. Did you know that they had lots of stores that stayed open 24/7 in first century Palestine? Well, of course they didn't. So I have to admit that this part of the story, the foolish bridesmaids do seem a bit foolish. When they eventually get back to the party, the groom says he doesn't know them and refuses to let them join in. They're shut out. What kind of behaviour is that? Maybe the groom doesn't know them, but surely somebody else at the party could confirm who they were. So at the end of the parable, the foolish bridesmaids are shut out of the feast. There is no party for them. Now, if I was one of the foolish girls, I think I'd be quite glad to miss that party. I wouldn't fancy spending hours in the company of this rude bridegroom who has been the cause of the trouble through his own selfishness. Or I wouldn't fancy hanging out with the smug, insufferable, wise girls who wouldn't even do anything to help us and lend some of what they had for us. And I don't think I'd be keen to mix with that whole group of people at the party, not one of whom was prepared to put in a word for me and tell the groom, I'm supposed to be there. But now I'm taking the story literally, and Jesus doesn't mean us to do that. His point is that being shut out and missing the party is a big deal. Some people have tried to paint Jesus' words in the worst possible light. They say that Jesus is the bridegroom in this story. Jesus is looking ahead to a day in the future. Now maybe that's the day of his return to earth, or maybe it's a day when we die, or maybe it's a day of judgment. You can take your pick. But the message is that Jesus may well end up shutting the door of the kingdom on our faces if we don't end up concentrating, if we're caught sleeping, if we take our eye off the ball, if we let our guard down for a second. Jesus will no longer accept us. There may be a moment when Jesus will say to us, I do not know you, and the door will be shut, finally, on us. Well, I hope we know Jesus enough to know that this is not what he would ever do. Do you remember another group of people, slightly bigger group of people, who all fell asleep? At the worst time of Jesus' earthly life in the Garden of Gethsemane, here was Jesus about to face arrest and all the agony that was going to follow from that. His earthly life was about to be brutally taken away from him. And as he prayed, he wanted his closest friends with him too. He wanted them at least to be with him and to be some kind of support. But they just kept falling asleep. And then there was a noise of soldiers coming, and Jesus is arrested, and these friends of his just turned tail, ran off, betraying him and abandoning him to his fate. And do you remember after Easter, when Jesus came back and rounded up all those friends, and he reminded them how they had fallen asleep and failed him, and that now he was shutting the door and the kingdom would be closed to them forever. They were going to be shut out from God. Oh, no, wait a minute. He didn't say that, did he? Instead, he came back and he said, death has been defeated. There is nothing stronger than the love of God. Come on then, let's go and tell the whole world the news. That's what Jesus said. That's what Jesus does. He doesn't kick us out. He invites us in. I'd like to suggest that the most complicated parable ends up with perhaps the simplest and most straightforward message. We're tempted to think when we've got a complicated story that the meaning of a complicated story is bound to be complicated as well. But I think in this particular parable it's the opposite. The point is not to try and analyse all the strange detail, but to become aware of a simple thing. Jesus is saying to us, don't miss out. Be awake and alive to the opportunities that come your way. And I think he means that in two ways. The words come from Jesus' care and compassion towards us. And they're also, I guess, a kind of call to action as well. The compassion comes from the fact that God has granted us the gift of life and wants us to live life to the full. And of course, even in this troubled world, there are many opportunities for us to make the most of ourselves. And there are also times when we miss our chance and we let things slip. And this is a warning from Jesus about regret. I'm going to read some words from Melissa Bain Sevier. She's a writer, a photographer and a Presbyterian minister from Kentucky. And she wrote this: we have so many opportunities to do things right and undo things we've done wrong. You've heard it said that no one in his deathbed wishes he'd spent more time at the office or regrets not having done more laundry. The things we regret are estrangement from family and friends and God. We regret not having taken more moments for pure joy more time for prayer and reflection. We regret moving too fast through life and not savouring the time we've been given, not appreciating the people we love, not exploring the deepest places in our soul. We burn up all our oil in things that don't matter and then don't have any time left for the things that do. Be ready and watchful, says Jesus. You want to be paying attention when the moment presents itself, when a friend needs an ear, when a family member needs your time, when God needs your heart, when the important, not just the urgent, is waiting. Don't be left outside because you were too preoccupied. Life is happening on the other side of the door. I think she's right. We need to be on the lookout for opportunities to embrace the things that are really important and add substance to our lives. We can fill up our time with work, or sitting about like a couch potato, or pottering, or trivia, and forget to make space for our hobbies, our relationships, our faith, our gifts, the things that matter most. And I also think that Jesus is calling us to action, telling us to be ready and open to those moments that come along when there is something that we can do that can make a difference for good in the world. It might just be a small thing, but it's something. It might be writing a letter, or joining a movement, or starting a new venture, or healing a damaged relationship. Don't miss out when opportunities come your way to do something. We can't all do everything, but we can all do something, and that's what we're called to do. Don't miss these opportunities. Keep your eye on the ball. Keep awake. You know, it's well seen that the people who devised worldwide Bible readings for churches, each week they haven't taken into account Remembrance Sunday in the UK. In other words, the parable of the 10 girls, which is today's reading, doesn't really fit with Remembrance Sunday. But maybe there's a wee link. So my final thought is this. Perhaps remembrance might be an example of one of these opportunities that comes our way. You see, in some ways, remembrance this season is taken very seriously indeed. In some ways, it's taken more seriously now than it was some years back. Of all the charities, it seems Earl Haig is obligatory. Other charities might be extremely important too. They might have badges, they might have ribbons, they might even have their own designated week. But nothing comes close to Haig. So for example, if you're on the TV, not wearing a poppy is not even an option. But is that it? Wearing a badge? Sticking in a few quid? Keeping quiet and still for a moment's silence once a year? Now, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, we're doing it now. But is that really it? Is that all we can do to honour the dead? Or are there other things we can do? I think the best way we honour those who died, those who sacrificed, is to actually work for a world where war is much less likely. And you might ask, well, how can we do that? We are not the people who are going to be deciding when a war is going to start. We're not going to make it. We're not the people that will make that kind of announcement. But there's plenty we could do. We could join a campaign like CAT, the Campaign Against the Arms Trade, which tries to change our country's reliance on making money through selling arms to some of the world's most despicable regimes, some of the world's most corrupt regimes. We make so much money as a nation out of doing that. We could be part of SCANA, Scottish Christians Against Nuclear Arms, because nuclear arms are within themselves inherently evil. And our congregation here has often been involved in events and services at Fasley. Or Given that wars are just basically arguments on a huge scale, we can contribute to a more peaceful world by working for justice wherever we are, for bringing factions together, to negotiate a way forward. And that can happen even at our family level. Whenever we work to make things fairer and listen to people who feel they've been treated badly and try and improve that situation, then we're helping to promote more peace in our world. At all levels, this matters. There's always something that we can do. So may God guide us all in the task of keeping ourselves alive to opportunities where we can benefit ourselves and the lives of other people too. Let's ask God to keep us sensitive to these moments when they come our way. Don't miss out, says Jesus. Let's be open to God's leading, and let's stay awake for the opportunities in life that God sends our way. Thanks be to God.